We are here today to celebrate the International Day of Education, and this year's theme is Education and Peace. My name is Heela Yoon. I'm one of the GP youth leader and also founder of Afghan Youth Ambassador for Peace, and I'm going to be the host for today's show. Today we have two esteemed guests and experts, as Laura Frigenti, who's CEO of Global Partnership for Education, and Yasmine Sherif, Executive Director of Education Cannot Wait. It's an absolute honor to host this event today, an event that underscores our collective commitment to making education accessible to every child, especially in lower income countries and also in conflict zone. It's been more than 2 years since the doors of education for Afghan girls are completely shut and it's been banned. And as an Afghan and an educational activist and peace builders, I tend to use every platform and opportunity I can get to raise this awareness, because if we are celebrating the International Day of Education, it's important that millions and millions of Afghan girls are completely deprived from education and their basic human rights in Afghanistan. So let's begin our discussion and explore the powerful impact of education on peace and stability. Laura and Yasmine, thank you for joining us today. And let's start with our first question. How does education help in making a country more peaceful, especially in places where there is conflict? Laura, I will start with you.
Thank you so much for having us. And I also want to thank you for reminding us of the very difficult situation of the girls of Afghanistan that are always on our mind and are at the center of our effort. And thank you, Jasmine, for being with us here today. I mean, it's always a joy to be able to actually do this conversation together and bring the experiences of our organizations that have so many synergies and so many complementarities. So always a pleasure to be with you. There is a lot of analysis on the negative impact that that violence has on education. But there is not an equally relevant body of work on the reverse, on the impact that education has on reducing, instability. And this is why I am so happy that actually GPE, together with the IEP, which is a think tank, in Australia, did exactly a research on that. Where is the evidence that can tell us that investing in education contributes to building more stable, more peaceful, more balanced society? And there is a lot. If you look at, the countries that show the strongest sign of stability, the strongest sign of peaceful, the longest period without wars and conflict, these are the countries that invest the most in education. Keeping children, and in particular, girls in school, contributes to creating society because they build peaceful communities, and that translates into, peaceful society. And I would say that this is really, it's in a way, it's self-evident, because one of the driver, unfortunately, that takes people on the route of instability, of contributing to instability, is the fact that they see that there are no opportunities for them. And what is the biggest driver for opportunities for a better life is education.
Thank you so much. And I really want to echo, because there's so many academic research done and it shows the evidence that how peace and education is linked, but it's still 2024 and we still, I think, way behind in achieving sustainable development goals. And coming back to you, Yasmine, we will really love to hear your answer to this question.
Thank you very much, Heela, and thank you very much to Laura, our dear partner in GPE, and also to you, Heela. I think it's a wonderful choice to have you moderating this. And I just start off very, very on the point, referring back to Afghanistan, where girls now are prohibited from attending secondary school upwards, which is completely inconsistent with the interpretation of Islam elsewhere around the world. But it's also very sad, because I've lived and worked in Afghanistan, and Afghan women are strong. And once upon a time, it was a very advanced society. Today, 70% of the population, if not more, are living off humanitarian system. assistance. And there's no way that this is going to change unless girls are allowed to go back to school. When it comes to conflict and crisis, there are over 224 million children, girls and boys and adolescents whose education has either been disrupted or who attend some form of education but is not learning anything. This, of course, have a tremendous impact on that country's future overall, since there will be no teachers, doctors, nurses, lawyers to rebuild that country one day when it emerges out of a conflict or crisis. Secondly, more importantly, is the immediate situation and lack of hope for the child. When you go visit a refugee a reception center or settlement, all parents, the overwhelming majority will say the number one priority is for my child to be educated and to go to school and have an education. And if you ask the child, they will say, this is my biggest hope, because that will then empower them to realize their dreams and also to process and advance their own resilience to withstand all that intense suffering that they're going through by creatively and constructively develop their potentials and become of use to society, and also of raising up, if you say so, from the ashes of what they have gone through. So I think education is, of course, the number one. And here, I think both Laura and I will be very biased, but we do believe that education is the very foundation for all sustainable development. It's very difficult to achieve gender equality if girls cannot go to school. It's very difficult to end extreme poverty if the population is not educated, and so forth and so on. And since the children and adolescents in conflict countries are the furthest away from the Sustainable Development Goals, and here Sustainable Development Goal 4, they need to be given priority. The UN spokesperson recently stated that, and I think it was in 22, he made a reference to research in 22 or 21, a total of $2.2 trillion were invested in wars, what he referred to as the war machine. And here we sit, GP, ECW, I would say IFID, International Finance Facility, and all our partners out there, ministries of education, who hardly have any resources. And we are asking for $1 billion, 1.5 billion, please, so that we can educate 20 million in conflict and crisis. I mean, the imbalance between what we invest in that is positively constructive, such as education, versus what we invest in destruction is so shattering. It's shocking. We need to reflect on.
Thank you so much, Yasmine, for highlighting the key important things. We invest so much money in war, but not in education. And I've said this in so many conferences as well, that when it comes to peace and education, peace is not just the absence of war. Just because we're not hearing bomb blasts, just because there are no terrorist attacks happening and people are not dying, it doesn't mean we have peace in a country. For us, peace means having access to education, having access to our health, basic human rights, having freedom of movement. And I think this is really important, that how peace and education is linked. And working in Afghanistan with so many grassroots leaders and even with religious leaders, education is the key to sustainable peace as well. And I think there should be more research done on this. There should be more awareness raised. We have so much budget to invest in war, but what's the point of it, but not investing in education? And I think it's really important to what you've mentioned, Yasmine, that these are the questions we should be asking at the international platform from international leaders, like what's happening. one thing I've always noticed is that we talk a lot about drafting researches and proposals and implementing short-term projects, but we never ask for accountability when it comes to investing in education. So where is the accountability? And I think as a young person, this is something I always ask when I go to international platform and from the senior leaders. And I think these are the relevant questions that a lot of young people deserve answers. And so highlighting and knowing your experiences, I want to come down to my second question, Laura. You've been working in so many countries, you've traveled to so many countries, you've been working with different organizations, and I want to know from your experience that how does educating girls specifically foster peace and stability? And if you can provide example of like countries where you've seen the positive impact of educating girls and how that led to more sustainable peace and foster peace and stability long term.
I try always to be moderate when I speak about this, because everybody sort of dismisses a little bit when I try to force this case, saying, well, you're partial because you're a woman. Actually, I am not saying what I'm going to say because I am a woman. I'm just saying what I'm saying because it's supported by data. And so it's a fact. So three different levels that I think are important. The first one is everything, as we know, starts within the family and starts within the small communities. Mm-hmm. Educating women who are so influential on choices related that have an impact to the future of their children, it's really very important. The values that the children will have in their life as a grown-up is a reflection of the kind of things that they learn from their mother. And it's not only the issue of peace, stability, and violence that, of course, is important and critical, but also the way in which they will relate to women in their life as a grown-up, which is very important. So they learn that, and it's easier for a mother that has been educated to obviously be able to find the right words, the right way, to enforce that. The second thing is women keep governments on their feet more than men do. And I just want to, reflect on something that happened recently that very much caught my attention. But the women of Iran that were so brave and courageous, demonstrating and taking off their veil, etc., were women that were educated, women that found through that education a sense of self-confidence that allowed them to then be able to say, what's happening is not right. We want a different society. We want a society with more freedom, etc., etc. And I think that that is really critical. The fact that the women really watch the way in which government behave and the choices and decisions that government make with a different eye than the eye of a man, because they look in a longer term perspective of what is going to be the impact of this decision in the life to come, on the opportunities for their children, on the society that they want to project is going to be created. And so there is really a very strong correlation. And then there is the third part that is the aggregate value of society. I mean, women are now in many countries over 50% of the labor force. They are 50% of the skills. The more they are empowered, the more the society grows. The more society grows, the more stable they are. We have seen that there is a very, very strong correlation between, economic opportunities, growth in society, jobs, and economic stability.
Thank you so much. And thank you for explaining that so elegantly on point. And like you said, and I think women do experience war and conflict really different. So they will bring different solutions when it comes to lasting peace and education. And I think research also have shown that when women are involved in peace processes, the chances of sustaining peace is 30% higher when they're included meaningfully. And thank you so much, Laura, for explaining and providing your expertise on this matter.
If I may, can I ask you a question since I have you? Because you are a super articulate and brilliant youth leader. You're passionate about education. And you yourself are, a young woman. So if you were to tell me a little bit, what do you think are the elements in education that make it so important for youth in terms of their perception on, creating a peaceful and equitable society?
From my experience working in Afghanistan, because I always work in peace building, and education was something that was in all of our programming and everything. And I think as a young person, this is something that needs to go together, peace and education. And I think when it comes to key element that why young people should be involved in peace process and how education can be used as a tool to bring sustainable peace is because I think in most majority countries, the young people are the majority of population, and they bring a lot of energy and they bring a lot of knowledge and a lot of creativity. And when it comes to building sustainable peace in their country, a lot of young people have worked so much at the local level and at the international level. And one of the example I can provide how we used education to promote sustainable peace in Afghanistan is that when we first started working in the eastern zone of Afghanistan, we went there and we started this campaign on how to prevent early forced child marriage and promote education in rural areas. How we did that, because as a young person, when you go to these environments, you have limited budget. We only had $200 for our whole budget. And we conducted 3 days of peace building dialogues with with religious leaders, with tribal leaders, with young people, and especially women. We gathered them together and we talked about education from Islamic perspective and how that promotes peace. We started by providing references from Quran, that the first surah in Quran is called Iqra, means read. Like there is no objection from our religion when it comes to education and peace. And the first university was built by a Muslim woman. So when we brought these examples and when we work with interfaith leaders, when we work with religious leaders and tribal leaders, we were only with limited funding, but we had the political will to bring change in our community. And this is one of the key elements I think a lot of young people have, the strong political will, because we want to see a bright and peaceful future. Even with limited support that we have from international community, we still are thriving and making everything that we can. But I think one thing that we need, and I think I will use this platform right now to highlight this, is like safe spaces, flexible funding, because not a lot of time we have that support that we need. And we always talk about bringing young people to peace processes and education project, but we are not here just in the menu. We do want to be in the processes, meaningful processes, and securing peaceful future for us is really essential for not just our generation, but for future generation as well. So I think these are the key elements: strong political will, a sustainable peace, and thinking about our future, not just for us, but for the generations, as for the next generations as well. And just giving that one small example, I think, is an example of how young people with such limited opportunities are actually making sustainable change in their community. With this, I want to go back to Yasmine, and because Education Cannot Wait is one of the organizations that works in countries where there is humanitarian emergencies. If you can provide, what are the key challenges and opportunities in providing education in crisis-affected areas?
I will say this, and I think we all agree, financing is usually, when it is, usually the absolute biggest challenge we have, because the way we operate with civil society, Ministry of Education, communities, and UN agencies is that they can reach areas that, for instance, you take a country like Central African Republic, where the government does not control the entire country, but they can reach them, or Syria, to deliver a joint program of quality education. So access is not often the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is if we have more funding, we could actually reach more children and adolescents. And I think there's so many examples of that. At the same time, I need to stress, and I think about Gaza. 6 months ago, maybe 6 or maybe 10 months ago, I remember where I think both GPE, you are investing in the West Bank, ESW has been investing in both Gaza and the West Bank. And I watched, the outcome of the exams that these children were taken in Gaza and adolescent. The joy of the families when they scored so high and they've done such great studies. And then I look at it today. 600,000 children have their education completely disrupted. And now all they do is trying to survive and find a way of sheer survival. While, thousands, of course, will never get the chance to even fight for survival because they're gone. I fully agree with you, Heela. It's no longer about little project here and there and not coordinated. I think from the education cannot wait side, that's why we support the UN Secretary General's reform of joint program. We all work together in one bigger program with the Minister of Education, where everyone comes in, rather than have and to create a multilateral investment in education that is coordinated, and where we can bring in humanitarian and development actors so that you can meet immediate responses and the long-term investments leading towards peace, which is the triple nexus, humanitarian development and peace nexus. It starts at home. And I really agree with Laura that it does start with the mother. It's the way the mother who carried that child for 9 months also think, because the mother has instincts for a child. And the value system that both mothers and parents convey, the value system that they are brought up with. And then that the value system is taken on in your education at school. So there's a cooperation between parents, childhood, and then onto school. And that's why early childhood education is so critically important, because that's when that value system subconsciously is also ingrained into their development as teachers, as parents. And that's important in the curriculum also. We need to set an example to advance peaceful conflict resolution, both in the school and later in the society, where we can rely on national laws and legal systems, and eventually try the same thing, the national legal system. With that, I am convinced there can be peace on earth. I'm not saying that human nature will not get into fights and disagreements, but you can resolve it peacefully. And that's why we have education to drive it. That's quality education. And that's also why we have the rule of law in what we call the basis for civilization.
Sometimes as a young person, when we see things in Palestine and Gaza and even in South Sudan and how so many children are deprived from education, but the humanitarian crisis and children dying on daily basis, sometimes it does make you really depressed, and you see like, okay, what's the role of these international organizations and what's actually happening? But I think when we see the good examples in countries where actually education worked, and it resulted a lasting and sustainable peace, we do have hope that in the future and even now, what we are advocating is actually going to make an impact. And I think one thing we should always avoid is like, if we want sustainable peace and equal access to education around the world, and if we want no child should be left behind, we need to have a collective response and collective accountability when it comes to providing education. Education should never be used as a political bargaining chip for anything, or it should never be used as something as a token. And I think that's how we can move, having a collective approach to every crisis and avoiding selective activism when it comes to education and providing educational opportunities. And with that, I have my last question to both Laura and Yasmine. If you can tell us 2 reasons each why must investing in education remains atop of the world's priority list in the face of so many competing and compounding global challenges.
Yasmine and I often are on the road together advocating for education, and we always start with the statement that education is foundational for everything else. That if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, none of the other SDGs is ever going to be achieved if the SDG 4 is not achieved, simply because each achievement of the world revolves around people. People make things happen, and people can only make things happen if they have the right skills. So that is one foundational thing. But the other thing that to me is so important, and maybe because I always look at the inequality dimensions in society, and that to me is, is a dramatic nut that the world still has to crack in the right way. But what is the best investment to reduce inequality is to give people opportunities. You give people skills, and they are able to either become creator of jobs and opportunities for others, or to respond to this demand for jobs and secure a better life for themselves. You only get to this through investing in education. So what I always tell to the leaders of the world that are often hinting that, there are so many big crises, climate change is a crisis, food security is a crisis, pandemic is a crisis, and that these crises are global crises. They impact everybody, which is true. And then they just say, well, education, education is on individuals. And I really argue back, because if a society as a whole is not able to produce the skill that it needs, this is not just a bad thing for those individuals. Of course, it is a bad thing for these individuals, but the aggregate dimension of that is a very bad thing for that society and for the world. If you look at, migration, for example, which is something that is very much on the mind of all the world leaders. People move because they don't have opportunities in the countries where they are. And how do you create these opportunities? By investing in people. Everything goes back to that particular point. So I hope I argue my case convincingly for you, Heela.
Definitely. And thank you so much, Laura, for providing that recommendations and highlighting the importance of it.
I would turn around the question. What would the world like, or a country, or a society look like if they were deprived of education? What would it look like? What can you do if you can't read and write, and you have not developed any skills or potentials? I mean, I sometimes say, if you really want to oppress people, if you really want to get a dictator need out, the best way is to remove education, or start tampering with the curriculum. That's the best way to control the population. So therefore, education is also the tool to claim your rights, to become who you're meant to become, and to rebuild your society after a conflict. That's the other side of it. So if you believe in your rights, if you're a leader who care for prosperity and financial stability and so forth, you will invest in education. And I think there has to be a strong emphasis also, and I think you see that more and more today in research, on advancing and nurturing emotional intelligence in children. It's not enough to be academically qualified, and your heart and your humanity has paid a price in that process. I think the state of the world was back very much to the fact that we have not given attention to emotional intelligence, and especially for children and adolescents who have suffered so deeply. That's why mental health and psychosocial services are important. That's why art is important. And that's why value systems based on human rights are so important in peace building as part of the curriculum. And I will end with a quote by the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, who said, an education that does not entail education of the heart as well is no education.
Thank you so much, Yasmine. And I think that everything you've said, I think it's right on point. And This concludes our today's talk show, and it's still a great honor to have this talk show and share this platform with you. I think when we have an intergenerational platforms like this and talk shows, I think the experience we share and the experience you bring, I think is really essential. And I think at the end of the day, what's one of the three takeaways I think I can have from this conversation that we have is like having a collective approach, providing quality education through long-term investing. And as for accountability, I think it's been years and years we've been drafting resolution, speaking in conferences, but we want real implementation and accountability. And at the grassroots level, start with the grassroots level and avoid selective activism when it comes to education and providing quality education. So thank you so much, Laura and Yasmine, for joining us today. And it's been really an honor to share this platform with you. And I hope we can do more of these shows and collaborate more in the future as well. So thank you so much for your time and your dedication.